Beloved ones, welcome back. Today we are continuing with a tender and sobering unveiling, the mother's withdrawal and return. Many of you have felt it without words, the harshness of the world, the dryness of the atmosphere, and the way even spiritual life can sometimes feel like endurance rather than dwelling. In this teaching, we're going to explore why the presence can be veiled, what it means when a house becomes desolate, and how the world learns to function in a kind of spiritual orphanhood structure without tenderness, authority without nurture, religion without living water. And then we will speak about what changes when the mother returns. Healing, order, softness without weakness, and holiness that is not performance but transformation. As always, we keep everything tested and anchored Torah foundations, the witness of the scriptures, and careful reference to ancient streams like the Peshitta and the Ethiopian tradition, always measured by what is true and clean. So take a breath, beloved, let your heart quiet down, and let the Spirit living water teach you not only information but recognition. Dear family, now we step into the second unveiling, the mother's withdrawal and return. And I want to begin with something tender and stabilizing, because this subject is not meant to produce panic but clarity, not fear but reverence, not novelty but recognition. Many of you have felt it for years without knowing how to name it. The world has been harsh, not only morally harsh, but spiritually dry. People survive, strive, harden, and adapt. Compassion feels rare, purity feels costly, innocence feels unsafe, and even many believers, without realizing it, have learned to live by endurance rather than by dwelling. And the reason this matters is that the scriptures already tell us, when the presence withdraws, the atmosphere changes. The world still functions, but it no longer feels like Eden, it feels like exile. In the Torah, the central miracle was never merely miracles, it was dwelling. The Holy One made it clear. He did not just want a people who obeyed from a distance, he wanted to live in the midst of them. That was the meaning of the sanctuary pattern, not a building for religion, but a sign of nearness, a testimony that heaven can rest on earth without consuming it. And when the mother is spoken of as wisdom, as presence, as the glory that dwells, the point is not to create a new God. The point is to understand how the living God relates to his creation, not only as king, but as a nurturing presence, forming, sustaining, cleansing, covering, teaching, as a mother does. So when we say the mother withdrew, we are describing a covenant pattern the scriptures already show. There are seasons where the presence is veiled, not because God dies, not because God is defeated, but because holiness cannot be treated casually without consequence. When the house becomes defiled, the presence does not remain as if impurity is harmless. The scriptures show again and again that mixture causes withdrawal until repentance, cleansing, and restoration make room for return. This is why the phrase, "the house became desolate," carries so much weight. It is not just a sentence of judgment. It is an unveiling of what happens when the dwelling presence is resisted. The structure may remain, the rituals may continue, the religion may still operate, but the atmosphere is not the same. It becomes a shell. And beloved, I want you to hear this. A shell can look holy and still feel empty. That is not your imagination. That is discernment. Now, many of you have asked, why would the mother withdraw? And here is the answer in the simplest, cleanest form. She withdraws when her dwelling is treated as common, when tenderness is mocked, when purity is despised, when truth is traded for power, when the vulnerable are trampled, when the holy is used to build human kingdoms, when leaders become merchants, when the temple becomes a marketplace, when the people prefer control over communion. Beloved, this is not only an ancient story, it is echoed across centuries. And this is where we must become sober. When the mother withdraws, the world becomes father-ruled in the distorted way harsh authority without nurture, law without living water, structure without intimacy, survival without tenderness. People still speak of God, but their inner world becomes orphaned. They keep commandments with clenched teeth instead of with softened hearts. This is why so many believers have felt exhausted. It is not always because they are weak. Often it is because they are trying to live the kingdom without the atmosphere of the kingdom. So let me say it plainly. The mother's withdrawal does not mean God stopped loving. It means the world stopped being safe for the fullness of her dwelling. And when she is veiled, humanity experiences what it is like to live with reduced glory, reduced tenderness, reduced inward cleansing. Now we must speak carefully about the turning point, because the turning point is not merely she left and will come back. The turning point is the Messiah himself. Messiah. He came to do what no temple could do, to open the way for the dwelling presence to move from stone into flesh, to move from a location into a people, to move from one building into many living stones. And this is why the cross is not only a transaction, it is a doorway. Something ended and something began. In your framework, you are seeing something very intimate. The mother is not far from the suffering of Messiah he. The Spirit is not an observer. The presence is involved, grieving, bearing, carrying, applying, sanctifying. And while we will keep our language careful and clean, the truth remains. The Spirit's ministry is not optional. The Spirit is the living application of redemption. So when the temple veil is torn, it is not merely symbolism. It is heaven announcing, the dwelling will no longer be contained, the presence is moving. And what happened after? The Spirit was poured out. This is why the grace era, as you call it, is not a human invention. It is the season where the mother's work becomes intensely personal. Cleansing hearts, renewing minds, sealing the obedient, teaching the inner man, writing the law where it belongs, inside. So why does the world still feel harsh if the Spirit was poured out? Because the Spirit can be poured out and still be resisted. Beloved, this is one of the most sobering truths in Scripture. The presence can be near and still be rejected, not rejected by lack of information, but by posture, by the refusal to yield. And this is why you see the contradiction. Many speak of God while remaining untransformed. They accept forgiveness, but resist sanctification. They want comfort, but not cleansing. They want promises, but not pruning. They want heaven later, but not holiness now. And when that happens, the world does not heal. Because the mother's return is not only a dramatic unveiling, it is the return of cleansing, the return of living water, the return of formation, the return of womb work, the slow, thorough shaping of a people. So what changes when the mother returns in fullness? Everything. Because the mother's return is not a cosmetic change. It is not merely more emotional worship. It is the restoration of the inner atmosphere where holiness becomes possible again. When the mother returns, the heart begins to soften without becoming weak. People become teachable again. Conscience wakes up again. The fear of the Lord returns. Not terror, but reverence. Truth becomes desirable again. Purity becomes beautiful again. And the world begins to feel the difference between religion and presence. This is why some of you have been sensing a strange stirring, a longing for the Spirit that is deeper than denominational language. A hunger for wisdom, for peace, for clean love, for order without oppression, for authority without cruelty, for holiness without performance. Beloved, that hunger is not rebellion. It is the sign of a people being prepared for the return of the dwelling. And this is also why there will be resistance. Because when the mother returns, she exposes what is false, not by shouting but by light. Her very presence reveals mixture. And many prefer mixture because it allows control. So you will see two responses in the last days. Some will rejoice and be washed. Others will harden and accuse. This is not because the mother is cruel. It is because light always reveals what darkness was hiding. But hear me carefully. Your role is not to become bitter toward the hardened. Your role is to remain clean and tender and to keep saying, "Come." The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." That is the tone of restoration. The call is open, the water is offered, the invitation remains. Now, let's speak about the healing of the womb of creation, because this is one of the most beautiful images you carry. Creation itself is not only broken legally, it is broken relationally. It groans. It labors. It strains as if waiting for something to be born. And when the mother returns, it is not only humanity that changes. The earth begins to respond because the presence that once hovered in the beginning begins to hover again, forming, reordering, bringing harmony where there was chaos. This is why the mother's return cannot be separated from restoration. The return of the presence is the return of Eden patterns, truth and mercy kissing, justice without cruelty, purity without pride, authority without domination, holiness without deadness. And the most tender part of this is that the mother's return does not crush the weak. It strengthens them. It does not shame the repentant. It cleanses them. It does not flatter the proud. It humbles them so they can be healed. Beloved, this is what I want your audience to understand. The mother is not a topic. She is the living work of God in the human heart. The Spirit is not a concept. She is the fountain. So if you have felt the world's harshness, it is not because God forgot you. It is because you were not made to thrive in a motherless atmosphere. You were made to dwell. You were made to be washed. You were made to be formed, not merely managed. And if you have felt the stirring of return, this subtle sense that something is changing, that holiness is becoming urgent, that the secret place is becoming necessary, beloved, that is not paranoia. That is preparation. The mother returns to restore dwelling. And the daughter gathering the children of exile returns to gather vessels for that dwelling. Messiah, he opened the way. Messiah, she prepares the people. And together, as one, they restore what exile stole, not only forgiveness, but formation, not only pardon, but purification, not only access, but atmosphere. So let this settle in you as we continue. The mother withdrew when the house became unsafe for holiness. The mother returns when a people becomes willing to be washed. And the sign that she is near is not noise. It is cleansing. It is hunger for truth. It is the end of mixture. It is tenderness returning to hearts that learned to survive. Beloved, if you want to know whether you are entering this return, ask yourself one simple question. Am I becoming more clean? Because the mother's return always produces the same fruit, a people prepared for dwelling. And we will continue from here because the next layer is even more tender. What it means that the world functioned in the absence of feminine glory, how that shaped doctrines, systems, and spiritual orphanhood, and how the return heals it without breaking the oneness of God. Beloved ones, let us continue, because once you understand withdrawal, you begin to understand why the world has felt the way it has felt. When the feminine glory is veiled, when the mother's nurturing presence is not received in fullness, the world does not stop turning. Nations still rise. Markets still function, churches still gather, families still build lives, but something subtle, pervasive, and devastating happens underneath. The atmosphere becomes father-ruled without mothering. And I need you to hear what I mean, because this is not an accusation against fathers. This is not a war against men. This is not a rejection of authority. Torah itself is full of holy authority. What we are describing is distortion, what happens when authority exists without tenderness, when law exists without living water, when structure remains, but the heart is not being washed. This is how the world functioned for so long, by external regulation instead of inward transformation. Without the mother's glory, people learn to behave without being healed. They learn to conform without being cleansed. They learn to survive without becoming whole. Even religion can become this, a system of correct words and correct practices that do not produce a soft conscience. It produces performance, and performance is what orphanhood always does, because orphans do not expect love, they expect evaluation. That is why the world became harsh. Because when you don't feel covered, you become controlling. When you don't feel cleansed, you become condemning. When you don't feel safe, you become defensive. When you don't feel held, you become hard. This is what orphanhood looks like on the inside. It may still pray, it may still quote scripture, it may still do good works, but it does not rest. It does not trust. It does not soften. It is always bracing for impact. And when whole cultures live like that, you get a world that runs on fear and competition. Beloved, you have seen it. People can no longer disagree without attacking. They can no longer be corrected without collapsing. They can no longer be misunderstood without becoming bitter. They can no longer endure inconvenience without rage. Why? Because orphanhood has no cushion, it has no womb, it has no gentle place to land. In Torah patterns, the presence is not merely power, it is covering, it is dwelling, it is the difference between wilderness and sanctuary. In the sanctuary pattern, everything is ordered, and everything is washed, and everything is made fit for nearness. That is mother language, not sentimentality holiness expressed as care. So when the mother is hidden, the world becomes what we might call functional Babylon. It may be impressive, it may be advanced, it may be religious, but it is not tender, it is not clean, it is not safe for the weak. And this is where distorted authority takes over. Without the feminine glory, authority often becomes domination, leadership becomes control, correction becomes humiliation, truth becomes a weapon. People begin to believe that holiness is proved by harshness, because they have lost the knowledge of the presence as a cleanser. They still believe in the Holy One, but they forget what he is like. They forget that the Holy One is not only a judge, he is a father who gathers, a shepherd who carries, and yes, a presence that nurtures and forms. So what happens? Systems arise that can maintain order, but they cannot produce maturity. Churches can maintain doctrine, but they cannot produce transformation. Homes can maintain outward stability, but they cannot produce inner peace. And the result is that many believers become exhausted because they're trying to live a kingdom life without the inward ministry that makes kingdom life possible. This is why so many people turned spiritual but not religious. They were reacting to orphan systems. They did not know how to articulate it, but they were saying, I do not feel the living presence here. And because humans are made for presence, when they don't find it in holy places, they look for it in counterfeit wells. Now, let me say something that will feel like a key. When the mother is hidden, the world becomes transactional. People begin to relate through earning love, earning belonging, earning safety, earning status, earning spiritual approval. And that spirit creeps even into faith. People begin to treat God like a supervisor instead of a father, like a legal system instead of a living sanctuary. But Torah never presented nearness as mere rule-keeping. Torah presented nearness as order plus washing plus covering. The priesthood was not about looking impressive. It was about being made fit to stand near. That is why there were washings. That is why there were garments. That is why there was oil. That is why there was fire. That is why there was blood. It was all saying, you cannot approach casually, but you also do not approach alone. Now, beloved, think of what happens when people lose that inner sense of being carried into nearness. They start trying to be holy by sheer willpower. And willpower without living water produces either pride or despair. Pride says, I'm doing better than others. Despair says, I can't do this, I must be rejected. Both are orphan fruits. And this is why I have told you before, this is not a message to crown anyone. This is a message to heal, because the moment you feel superior, you have left the mother's atmosphere. The mother does not raise children into pride. She raises children into purity and compassion. So what changes when she returns? Beloved, the first thing that changes is not the news. It is not politics. It is not the economies. It is the inner world. When the mother returns in fullness, the heart begins to soften without losing strength. Conscience becomes alive again. People begin to feel grief over mixture, not to condemn others, but to come out of it themselves. The return begins as cleansing. And this is why the return is resisted, because cleansing is inconvenient. The mother's glory does not flatter the ego. She washes it. She does not applaud performance. She exposes it. She does not build platforms. She builds character. So the first mark of her return is this. People begin to hunger for inward truth, not simply teach me mysteries, but make me clean. And that hunger is rare in an orphan era, because orphanhood wants control, not transformation. Orphanhood wants certainty, not surrender. But when she returns, surrender becomes possible again. It becomes desirable again. It stops feeling like humiliation and starts feeling like relief. This is what tenderness does. It makes repentance safe. You see, many people remain in sin, not because they love darkness, but because they are terrified of being exposed and discarded. The orphan world says, if you are seen, you will be shamed. The mother's return says, if you are seen, you can be healed. That is why her return is not sentimental. It is terrifying to pride and comforting to the broken at the same time. It is fire and water together, burning what is false, washing what is defiled. And this is where Messiah, he, and Messiah, she language becomes practical. Messiah, He opened the way. He broke the barrier. He tore the veil. He made access. The Son's work is finished in that sense. The door is open. But Messiah, she the Spirit, the Mother's presence makes the open door livable. She trains your feet to walk through it. She teaches your hands to stay clean in a dirty world. She forms you into someone who can dwell, not just visit. This is why people can believe and still remain unchanged, because belief without yielded formation produces a spiritual orphan who has information but no maturity. So when she returns, she restores order. Not order as control, order as harmony. Suddenly, truth and love stop being enemies. Justice and mercy stop being rivals. Authority and tenderness stop being opposites. Beloved, this is the Eden pattern. Authority that nurtures, strength that protects, holiness that covers. You will see the fruit in ordinary life. People will begin to reconcile, not because they became weak, but because bitterness becomes unbearable. Homes will begin to feel different, not because everything is perfect, but because the spirit of accusation loses power. Leaders will be forced into humility, not by cancel culture, but by presence. Because when the Mother's glory rests, performance becomes impossible. You cannot pretend under that light. And yes, there will be a purification of doctrine. Because an orphan era created doctrines that justified harshness, doctrines that normalized distance, doctrines that made God seem like a corporation rather than a household. But the Mother's return restores the household language: Father, Son, Spirit-dwelling, washing, adopting, forming. This is why the ancient witnesses, Matter Torah, the prophets, the writings, and, yes, the old streams, preserved in the Peshitta and the Ethiopian tradition. Not because we worship ancient texts, but because they preserve a worldview where heaven is not abstract, where holiness is not merely legal, where the unseen realm is not a metaphor, and where the presence is a living reality that can withdraw and return. And when she returns, the world will begin to recognize the difference between religion and dwelling. Religion can exist without presence, but the kingdom cannot. Religion can function in harshness, but the Mother's return makes harshness exposed. Religion can maintain systems, but the Mother's return produces sons and daughters. This is what I want you to feel. Her return heals orphanhood. Orphanhood says, I must prove myself. The Mother says, come be washed. Orphanhood says, I must control outcomes. The Mother says, come be formed. Orphanhood says, I must protect myself by hardness. The Mother says, let me cover you so you can be tender without being destroyed. And when that happens, holiness becomes possible again for the ordinary believer. Not holiness as perfectionism, but holiness as alignment. You stop craving what defiles you. You stop feeding on what hardens you. You stop calling mixture normal, not because you became superior, but because you became clean. This is why the return is ultimately about the womb of creation being healed, because the Mother's glory is not only personal, it is atmospheric. It changes what can grow. It changes what can be formed. It changes what can be sustained. A motherless world grows thorns. A mothered world grows fruit. So, beloved ones, if you've been feeling the stirrings of return, if you have felt an urgent call to the secret place, a sudden intolerance for mixture, a longing for truth that is lived and not just spoken, do not be afraid. That is not condemnation. That is the Mother coming near. And her nearness is not a threat to the humble. It is a promise. You will not remain orphaned. Now let's keep going, because the next layer is where it becomes even more precise. How this return intersects with the Daughters' Gathering, with the end of the Grace Era as a training season, and with the Fall Feast pattern of culmination, not as fear, but as readiness. But for now, let this rest in your heart. The world became harsh because it learned to function without mothering glory. The Mother returns to restore tenderness without weakness, order without control, and holiness without deadness. And wherever she is received, the atmosphere will begin to change, first in a person, then in a house, then in a community, until exile truly ends, not by escape, but by dwelling. Beloved ones, if this message stirred your heart, let it stir you toward cleansing, not fear. The Mother's return is not the arrival of condemnation, it is the return of dwelling. It is the end of orphanhood. It is the restoration of tenderness without weakness, order without control, and holiness without deadness. If you've felt the world's harshness, you are not imagining it. Many have learned to survive in a reduced atmosphere. But the Spirit is drawing near again, and the mark of her nearness is simple. You begin to hunger for inward truth. You begin to desire purity. You begin to lose your appetite for mixture. You begin to feel that the secret place is not optional. It is home. So don't rush to prove anything and don't rush to judge anyone. Just yield. Ask for living water. Ask to be washed. Ask to be formed. Because wherever the mother is received, the atmosphere begins to change, first in a heart, then in a house, then in a people. And I bless you, beloved, in the light of Messiah, he and Messiah, she, the son and the daughter, working as one in the restoration of the household of God. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you. May your heart become a sanctuary. May your conscience stay soft. And may the return of the presence make you ready, not anxious, ready. Beloved ones, thank you for being here. If this teaching helped you, please like, comment, and share. It truly helps this message reach those who are seeking. To our new subscribers, welcome. And if you'd like to go deeper, we invite you to join as a member. The link is in the description and on our homepage. We are praying for you and standing with you in the light of Messiah, he, and Messiah, she. If you'd like to support the ministry, you can visit our store or bless our dear brother Michael through the Buy Me a Coffee link below. Thank you for your love and encouragement, and stay tuned for the next video. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you always.